when people, when the people do that move of, it's not happening, and then it's good that it is, but then sometimes it's always been that way. So one of the things that people in the trans ideology, they'll say like, trans has always existed, or it's always been with us, or it's not that there's been an increase in trans kids, it's that they've always been that way, and now we're allowing them to express who they really are. And so they do this sort of shell game, and I think there's a strategy underlying it, which is essentially, if I tell you it's not happening, then you're not going to be concerned. So if I have an agenda and I want to push it through and I don't want anyone to battle it, I want to sort of pull the wool over your eyes as I'm trying to do it. And then as soon as I'm close by and it's about to happen, then I can say it's happening and it's good that it is, right? It's sort of like the object is to sort of move closer to power while appearing not to move at all.
Welcome to Conversations with me, Peter Boghossian. Today I'm delighted to have Rob Henderson as my guest. Rob has a Ph.D. in psychology from the University of Cambridge. He also attended Yale University and served in the U.S. Air Force. Rob has studied social cognition, moral psychology, and social status. His writings have appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe, and many, many other places. I love Rob's Substack and I recommend it. And I subscribe to it and read it regularly. Rob and I are both founding faculty fellows at the University of Austin, which is what brings us together today. I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I do. Rob, I love your work, extremely thoughtful, challenges some of my ideas, and I think you provide really cogent explanatory mechanisms for what's happening in the culture right now. So let's dive into it. You coined the term luxury belief, is that correct?
Yep, luxury beliefs, that's right.
Tell us about it. What is a luxury belief?
Yes, so luxury beliefs are ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper class while often inflicting costs on the lower classes. I developed this framework, and it's informed by a lot of research in sort of old school sociology and economics. But the sort of the seed of this idea came from my own personal observations and experiences. So I arrived at Yale in 2015, and that was my first experience with higher education. I was the first in my family to go to college. So, I went to Yale for undergrad, Cambridge for grad school, and I finished up a Ph.D. last year. But before my entry into higher ed, my life was a lot different. So, if I back up,
Air Force.
Right. Well, so immediately before Yale, I was in the Air Force. I served in the military, and I had grown up in foster homes in Los Angeles and all around California. Got into a lot of trouble, had a lot of sort of chaotic home life issues, barely graduated high school, and I knew that I was kind of on a bad path, and I sort of enlisted out of desperation to get out of there. So as soon as I graduated, I was 17 years old, left for the military, and then, fast forward.
You don't have to be 18. I thought you had to be 18.
As long as you have a signature from a parent. Yeah, you can join at 17 if you have a parent or guardian signature. So that was my experience, right? I was in foster homes, in the military, and then I get to Yale, and I kind of knew at the beginning, when I arrived, like Yale was going to be this place where students were going to be from different economic backgrounds.
Yeah.
At Yale, there are more students from the top 1% of the income scale than the
Right.
entire bottom 60%. So I already knew in advance, all these kids were going to come from rich families. I wasn't so prepared for the social class differences, the economic class differences I knew, the social class differences, the cultural differences I wasn't prepared for. So I was hearing a lot of
Like what? Like, give me an
peculiar,
example.
bizarre opinions.
What's it?
So one example that I heard repeatedly at Yale is that like all family structures are equal, or that it doesn't matter how a child is raised, single parent or alternate family arrangement, step parent, and so on. And yet, so an example that I've given you, I've written a couple of essays about this luxury beliefs idea. I had this conversation
On your Substack, by the way.
Substack.
And they were excellent. Okay.
Thanks. This young woman I went to Yale with, she told me that she thought that marriage and monogamy were outdated, and that we should, society should evolve beyond this, and sort of patriarchal institutions. And I said, okay, that's, this is 2015. I didn't have a lot of sort of deep thoughts about social or political issues, which in itself is a kind of class difference. So I just asked her, like, well, how did you grow up then? And she said, well, I was raised by my mom and dad. And I said, okay, like how how do you plan to live your life? Like, what kind of family would you like to have? And she said, well, eventually, after law school, I'll probably go on to have, get married and have a child. And I said, well, you're going to get married? And yeah, but she's like, just because I want to do it doesn't mean like everyone should have to do it. Like, I think ideally we would evolve beyond it. I'm like, so on the one hand, you benefited from this age-old institution. You were raised by two loving parents in a stable family environment. You plan to pass on this benefit of marriage to your own children and raise them in a safe, secure environment with you and your spouse. And yet your official public position is, oh, people shouldn't do this. We should evolve beyond it. And so there was this kind of duplicity here. Publicly, she was providing this sort of unique, unusual, fashionable opinion. Marriage is a patriarchal, outdated institution. But privately, she's still doing the thing that will confer benefit to her and her offspring and her family.
And so that is an example of a luxury belief.
That's a luxury belief, is this belief that all family structures are equal. And there are other examples of this too.
Equal.
Yeah.
That's the stupidest
They're
thing
all
I've ever.
They're all the same. They're all the same. And what really drove this point home for me was I was sitting in class my second semester at Yale, and the professor of this class administered this anonymous poll, and it was a seminar style class of 20 some students. And the question was, how many of you were raised by both of your birth parents? And it was an anonymous poll, and the professor put the results up on the PowerPoint slide after we had responded to this anonymous poll. And out of 20-something students, only 2 said they were not raised by both of their birth parents. It was me and one other student. I don't know who the other person was. Yeah. So then I went digging into the research of students who go to these fancy universities, current and future members of the ruling class, and the vast majority are raised by both of their birth parents. And yet the fashionable belief is that marriage is outdated. We should move beyond it. We're definitely not going to promote it.
Right. In the literature, the queering marriage or queering of it. Just as an aside, I read Matt Thornton's The Gift of Violence. He's my friend and jiu-jitsu teacher. Fantastic book, but he talks about the importance of an adult male in the home. It's a fascinating. The data is absolutely obvious, and as you talk, I'm wondering if this is hypothetical, of course, this is the throwaway, but I'm wondering if we showed people that data, what their response would be. I guess if it were, would that be a way to test if it were a luxury belief, if they wouldn't revise it in the face of overwhelming evidence?
Well, I think that if you revised your luxury belief, then that would be. That would not be a luxury belief, right? Like the willingness to change your mind. But I think a lot of people, because the beliefs confer status, a lot of people are unwilling to change their mind.
Yeah, and you write about a lot of things. You document the history, like you write about duels, you write about spices, you write about how people... I can't remember the King's Court or what have you said only spices in desserts, and then it fell out of favor, and then all right, cool. I want to do something. I want to look at some stuff we've done, and I want your expert commentary on those videos. All right, so this clip is from Dartmouth when we did a university tour. Tell us why you strongly disagree with that claim.
Because ignoring the fact, by ignoring race in admissions, you're ignoring the real fact that in United States society, different races are treated differently and systematically are discriminated against to get different opportunities. By saying that by putting everyone on an equal playing field, you're not accounting for the fact that the playing field is so very unequal. People who have more are from better neighborhoods, who have better schools, who have access to better tutors, because this system has been systematically, the education and housing systems have been built to systematically gentrify and alienate people who are not white, and specifically people of color.
What are your thoughts?
I mean, I like the whole idea of race being considered in college admissions. I mean, I sort of reject the entire implicit assumption of this whole thing in the first place. So the idea is that, because people are treated unequally based on race and other considerations, that admissions should attempt to rectify these kind of societal disparities, when if this is your concern, you should actually do it at the beginning, right? Like, don't wait until people are 18 years old when all of the disparities have already sort of emerged. Why not look at early childhood education or family structure or what kind of neighborhoods and environments and role models that these kids have? You're not going to be able to fix the problem all the way after the kid is essentially an adult.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I also just think like the whole idea of like, why do we care so much that people go to college in the first place? Like, what is the ultimate aim of society? And look, like, only 3% of foster kids graduate from college. Like, I'm a member of this 3%, right? I mean, the graduation rate for foster kids is so low. It's much lower than even children in the lowest quintile of socioeconomic status. So children in the bottom quintile of socioeconomic status in terms of family structure, right? Poorest families, it's 11%. So if you're a poor child in the U.S., you're 4 times more likely to graduate from college than a foster child. Which is okay, there's a disparity here, but no one's saying, oh, well, we should have foster kids graduate at the same rate as poor kids. And we're focusing on race. Some people focus on class. No one's focusing on foster kids. And so a lot of these kind of like factions arise because of these interest groups. But look, for me, I've reached the sort of summit of education, and I don't think like, even if every single poor kid, foster kid, black kid, every kid who's been marginalized or mistreated in their lives gets a degree from Harvard, it's not going to magically make everything they went through. Okay, so if we accept this guy's argument that they've been mistreated and so on and so forth, oh, but they have a degree from Harvard, does that make up for it? Does that compensate for it somehow? I don't think so. I think most young children don't care about going to Harvard. They would rather live in a safe, stable 2-parent family, receive love and attention and care. And this whole idea that a college degree is going to magically fix their lives, I think that's totally misguided.
Yeah, it is interesting. I hadn't thought explicitly about the foster care thing. I was thinking that, the main goal of the institution of academic institutions has become to promote. But why wouldn't the main goal be something else? Like, why wouldn't it be something to do with ecology? Why wouldn't it be helping disabled people? I mean, I guess there's a basket or a bundle of things, disabled people in there, the environment are in there. But I thought that argument was so interesting, and I can see how someone can get trapped into that world. Just think, but the consequence of that has to be the destruction of the consequences of the institution, because you're letting people in. The whole idea of the institution, bracketing the truth-finding mission, is that when you graduate someone, you give them the imprimatur of like, oh, he's graduated from Yale, he has this, he's capable of doing this.
Yeah. Why is that the goal in the first place, though? Like, okay, so now we look at these outcomes, these metrics. Oh, so now the disparities have shrunk because more people are going to college or more people are earning a comfortable income. Why are those the metrics of interest? Why not, well-being or childhood safety or like the sort of phenomenological experiences of kids who grow up marginalized or mistreated or whatever? Yeah. And so there's this sort of what I think is happening often in students and graduates of elite universities is they derive their own sense of self-worth from having a fancy degree or going to an elite law school or getting prestigious internship or getting high-paying jobs. That matters a lot for them and their identity, and they assume that must matter for everyone else. Most people don't want to go to a fancy university. Most people don't, care about becoming the richest or most prestigious or interesting person.
Well, I don't know about the richest. Most people
that
would
might
want that.
be. But even then, I think most people would like to have a comfortable living. I don't think people would want to be the richest.
Yeah.
But given the choice, I think a lot of people, and especially a lot of kids, would rather live in again, like a sort of nurturing, safe, comfortable environment. But this is, I think, overlooked by a lot of elites, a lot of highly educated and affluent people, because they take it for granted. If you grow up rich, you take money for granted. And if you grow up in a stable, safe 2-parent family, you take that for granted too. And the vast majority of kids who grow up in and go on to attend Ivy League schools, they take all of that stuff for granted. And so they're sort of fixated on how do we get other people to get this fancy degree that matters so much to me.
Okay, so is the consideration of race should be moved from the college admission process, is that a luxury belief?
Well, if you look at the family backgrounds of ethnic minorities, underrepresented minorities at elite institutions, many of them are are extremely well off. Again, 1% of more students at Yale from the top 1% of the income bracket than the entire bottom 60%, and that's across ethnic groups. And so if you meet with Hispanic or Black or other underrepresented minorities and you sort of ask them about their family background, they're not coming from marginalized and poor areas. So it does. I mean, it benefits the sort of elite within these ethnic groups. But if you consider other things like class or socioeconomic background, then maybe that would be a more fair system.
So I'm curious about something, and there's no expectation that you would know this, but when you gave the percentage of kids from foster home who went to college, you don't happen to know the racial breakdown of that, do you?
Of the 3%,
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, I know that underrepresented minorities make up are disproportionately represented among foster kids, but then among the racial breakdown of the foster kids who do end up graduating, I don't know.
That would be interesting. As central banks in countries like China, India, and Australia began transitioning to a digital currency, the Federal Reserve has been contemplating the same for the U.S. With a digital currency, the government could track every single purchase you make. Officials could even prohibit you from purchasing certain products or even easily freeze or seize all or part of your money. These are some of the reasons concerned Americans reached out to Birch Gold Group. They want to have a physical asset that's independent from the US dollar. Gold, held tax sheltered in a retirement account. Learn if gold is right for you too. Text Peter to 989-898 and they'll send you a free info kit on gold. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of happy customers, countless 5-star reviews, Birch Gold has been helping my listeners from the very beginning. Text Peter to 989-898, 989-898, and claim your free info kit on gold, because if a central bank digital currency becomes reality, it'll be nice to have some gold to depend upon. It'll be interesting. My daughter's adopted, but that's different from being a foster kid. But I'm just thinking about the research that you could do to figure it. If you had some hard data on that.
Yeah, I didn't have this. So I grew up not knowing who my dad was.
Yeah.
And I knew my mom. I knew her because of social worker documentation that she was Korean. But I had no idea who my father was. So like whenever I was asked, I just put unknown or didn't know or whatever.
Yeah.
And then when I applied for college, I still didn't know who my dad was. So I don't know. I don't remember which racial category I checked either. It was either mixed race or Asian or something. But earlier this year, I took a 23andMe DNA test, and my father was Hispanic, probably Mexican, based on sort of the way they trace these things. And I remember looking at that, I'm like, man, I could have put Hispanic.
I know, right?
I could have put Hispanic on my college application. It ended up turning out okay anyway. But this is like I just think the whole fixation on race is just so silly, right? Like I don't want to be treated based on this or that. Like just can you take people sort of based on the metrics, the grades, the test scores, maybe the essay, but the whole fixation on race I think is misguided.
Because you wrote something about the essay and in your work and how it's skewed toward the essay to wealthy people, and that's one of the reasons you wrote. The SAT is a luxury belief. You wrote about that too, which I thought was great. I had a thought, but I lost it. All right, let's watch another clip. So tell her why you agree that trans women should be allowed in women's sports.
So I think there's a lot of nuances to the question. Is it professional? Have these people medically and physically transitioned? A lot of that goes into the equation. But if we're talking hypothetically, I think the most common thing to talk about is collegiate athletes, and normally with people who have transitioned. So you look, for example, at someone like Leah Thomas, who is the swimmer from UPenn, who came first in her event. If you look at her statistics from her freshman year when she was competing in the male division to where she was at by her senior year or junior year, whatever last year was, when she was competing and winning the tournaments, as she started to take estrogen and hormone replacement therapy and things like that, her statistics went down a lot. And the difference between her and the male world record and the difference between her and the women's world record were pretty much the same when she was competing as a man versus competing as a woman. And so I think a lot of other biological factors outside of hormones, we think play a much bigger impact on what sports are, when really the only difference that tends to happen is hormones and the way you can build muscle mass.
So do you think there are biological differences between people born men and people born women?
So there's some, but
On
if
average.
you look at it, on average, yes. But if you look at it, most people fall into a window of if you saw their skeleton, you wouldn't be able to tell if they were a man or a woman because they don't fall to either extreme.
To be clear, that's demonstrably false. So we absolutely can. But what did you make about that?
I mean,
clip?
it is false. I think he was getting at this idea of sort of overlapping distributions
Yes, that's what he
for
was
strength, and they're actually so there's a lot of overlapping distributions for various traits where it is true for like psychological sex differences, but in terms of physical sex differences, especially for upper body strength, there's almost no overlap at all. Research shows that the average man is stronger than 99.9% of women. Hand grip strength, it's even more divergent. Hand grip strength, there's almost no overlap at all. There's some research based on age where like the average 80-year-old man is much stronger than the average 20-year-old woman in terms of hand grip strength. And these are evolved sex differences. So upper body strength between men and women is so vast that it's essentially sort of two different categories altogether, no overlap.
So is that a luxury belief or no?
So luxury belief specifically focuses on class, but I have seen people invoke the idea for like other sort of marginalized or disadvantaged groups, and so I've seen some feminists use this, in terms of the trans debate, where you essentially have biological males encroaching into female spaces, and so from their perspective, from the feminist perspective, because women have been historically mistreated, and now you have biological males coming in and beating women at sports or going into their dressing rooms or sort of dictating how these spaces should be operated, they consider this to be a luxury belief.
Yeah, it does seem to comport with the definition that you gave earlier.
I coined this luxury beliefs idea in 2019.
Yeah.
And I never would have predicted in a million years in my wildest dreams that 8 months later, people would start calling to defund the police. It was just mind-boggling, right? The luxury beliefs idea, families and drug legalization, open borders, some of these things, abolishing the police, like I wouldn't have predicted.
Yeah, they also want to abolish police, abolish prison.
Well, that's how it started. It was abolish police, and then gradually they sort of modified it to defund the police.
So just for the record, to be clear, I have had a radical transformation on my position on that. I now believe that if a community wants to defund the police, 100%. Defund the police, but you do not get federal assistance. You get no assistance. You need to live with that.
So it depends what you mean by community, right? Like if I'm
thinking of Portland, for example, where I live.
So even if you polled ordinary citizens who work in Portland, the restaurant servers and truck drivers and whatever, like plumbers, ordinary people. But then you have maybe 20% of Portland that are like these hardcore activists who don't have real jobs, and all they do is demonstrate and protest 100%. And disrupt. If they say that we should defund the police, like I don't think like Portland should be punished for that 20%.
I'm going to push back on you, and I'm going to tell you what changed my mind.
Okay.
Because if they really didn't want the police defunded, they should vote. They live in a democracy. There has to be a consequence of you not participating in public life.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, some others have pointed this out too, that the sort of the squeaky wheel gets the grease idea. Right. If you're unwilling yourself to participate in the process, maybe you don't have time, maybe you have a real job, so you can't spend all your days politicking and protesting, but you can vote. And if you're not showing up to the polls, then maybe there are some costs to that.
Let me be the first one to tell you, once the Portland Police Department and prisons are completely abolished, if the criminals don't run free and murder everybody and it becomes some flourishing paradise, Rob, I want you to know I'm going to be the first one to say publicly, I was wrong. I thought this place would turn into
So even then, hellhole. Peter, I still wouldn't agree. Because children can't vote, and they will suffer from this. So I was raised in sort of unstable circumstances, and I can sort of vividly recall what that was like, and to be sort of that powerless while all these adults are making these decisions. And so a lot of kids would suffer from the absence of policing too.
Oh, terribly! The murder rate would go through the roof.
So even then, and these kids would watch their kids get murdered, or their parents get murdered, or other kids. And so even then, I would say, ignore the activists and still try to force police on people.
I'll throw this out to you. I'll argue for your side for a second. Let's say you defunded the police. I mean, like, genuinely defunded the police. I think Portland Police Department is down 120. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's down 120 officers, one traffic cop, and it's a nightmare. But arguing for your position, even if you abolish the police and the crime rate went through the roof, the people who wanted the police abolished would say, well, you didn't do it right. Well, that's not what it's just like communism, right? Well, that's not the real
abolishing police has never been tried.
Yeah,
we need more social workers, man.
Yeah. So there would always be recourse to something instead of saying, wow, maybe I was wrong about this idea. Maybe this was just like a truly stupid idea.
We need more like violence interrupters. Have you heard that term? The violence interrupters. Which is like, to me, that just sounds like a guy in cargo shorts with a whistle. Let me interrupt this violence, like a referee or something.
Yeah, there are some, it is the failure to grasp that there are some extraordinarily bad and dangerous people. Some just
1% of the population is responsible for 63% of the violent crime.
Yeah, that's right. A similar statistic was in that book I mentioned before, Matt Thornton's The Gift of Violence, and it's pretty shocking how it's the same number, a very tiny number of people are responsible for a radically disproportionate number of and we know who they are. They're young males,
unmarried,
with no adult
education.
They grew up with no adult male in the home.
Right. Yeah.
And if you're incarcerated, last figure I read, you're 6 times more likely. If your parents is incarcerated, you're 6 times more likely to be incarcerated. And if both of your parents are incarcerated, the figure I read, and this was a while ago, so it could be outdated, it was 13 times more.
Yeah.
That's serious. All right, let's watch this one.
Can I put in like my 2 cents as a non-binary person? Cool. I am gender non-conforming. I use they, them pronouns. Do you know what that means?
I believe so, yes.
Are you aware of like the theory of social constructionism?
Yes.
So
I'm a gender studies scholar.
Yeah. So I'm much younger than you. These
are
all, this is all very new. I understand. Like my parents are boomers. They're in their 60s. They've had a really hard time understanding. So I've had to explain this to a lot of people in your generation. So you're aware of social constructionism. You're aware of gender as a social construct. When you say there are only 2 genders, those 2 genders are just social constructs that we made up. From birth, you are assigned a male at birth because you have a penis, I'm assuming. You present as male. Do you identify as male?
Are you asking if I identify as male?
What's your gender?
I identify as male.
Because you were assigned a male at birth. Are you cis?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure where you're going with this. I'm trying to understand where you're going.
The idea of there being only 2 genders is a social construct because we have this idea of being assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth. Now, I'm non-binary. That's something that I have learned about myself over the last 6-7 years. After I was a teenager, I learned about sociology. I learned about gender as a social construct. And I realized that I don't fit into the box of just a cis woman. Okay, my gender is completely whatever I feel like in the moment.
Well.
So I was wondering if you could explain that.
Well, so one of the things that like these sort of sociologists, gender theorists, these sort of critical theory scholars do is they conflate sex and gender. So male, female, that's sex, that's not gender.
Right. So
it is true to some extent that gender is a kind of social construct.
It's performed
different cultures.
Like Judith Butler, it is.
A man and a woman, right? Those are sort of cultural constructs to some degree. There are sort of expectations of men and expectations of women.
Pink and blue.
Right. But male and female, that's sex, and that's defined by the size of your gametes, your sex cells. So if you have the smaller sex cells, if you have sperm, you're biologically a male, and if you have larger sex cells, gametes, you're female. And this is true across the animal kingdom. And so there are male animals and female animals. And so they do this sort of verbal trickery, to say gender is a social construct, but you've been assigned male at birth.
That whole
meaning
concept
you're assigned
you weren't assigned to anything.
Yeah.
You were identified. The whole assigning makes it seem like it's arbitrary or almost random.
Which really doesn't make any sense. I mean, there's this sort of shell game where, so some sort of thinkers will say that if a little girl likes dolls and likes to wear makeup, it's because she was conditioned to be this way. This is social conditioning, right? And it's the patriarchy, what have you, that inculcated those preferences in her, and that's why she likes those things. And yet, for a lot of what man to woman trans individuals, when you ask them, how did you know this? They'll often say, well, when I was a little boy, I liked to play with dolls and I liked to wear makeup and I liked to do these girly things. So when a biological female likes to do certain things, they say it's conditioning. When a biological male likes to do certain things, suddenly it's innate, right? So sometimes it's innate, sometimes it's conditioning. And so there's just a lot of inconsistencies in the entire argument, right? Sometimes they'll accept arguments that we have innate personalities and preferences and so on. And other times it's all socially conditioned.
Yeah. So in the case of this person, and I actually rather liked her. In the case
She was patient.
How does that happen to somebody? Like, how does somebody partake in that delusion so thoroughly that they then exposit? I mean, how does that happen?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is so especially if you get caught up in that kind of social environment from an early age. Maybe she entered college, she was uncertain about identity, she gets caught up in this crowd.
That's
she
the
sort
word
of has
right
those
there,
inclinations.
college. That's my education system.
I mean, she may have been prepared. Like the seeds may have been planted through, the internet and through media and through sort of having access and avenues to all these kinds of influencers and people who talk about these issues. And she sort of got swept up in it. And now at this point, if you asked her to relinquish those beliefs, you're asking her to give up her friends,
all
her
of
allies.
These people. See, you put your finger on it. You're asking her. So right now, she finds a community of people who support her.
Who agree with her.
Right. And so you're asking her to break with the tribe.
White women. When was this?
The physical manifestation of the mask.
Last summer? Yeah, so okay. Yeah, they still got the masks outside. Yeah. The masks outside?
Is the mask outside relating to signaling theory?
That's an indicator that you are likely on one certain political team, and you can instantly tell others, right? Like if I want to know who my allies are, it's a quick avenue to say, oh, you believe in the same thing that I do.
It's so funny to me that people are walking around and we look at them, we walk down the street. This is going to get me in a lot of trouble and I'm going to say it, but people wear their delusions. I'm an atheist. They wear their delusions in terms of religious symbolism. They wear their delusions in terms of mass. They wear their delusions. And it's so interesting to see the physical manifestation of the belief mechanism, right? I've seen people wearing masks, by the way, in cars with nobody in the car, walking down the street with literally nobody around, which I find interesting. So you write about something and I just thought it was so interesting the way you framed it on your Substack. Tell me about victim signaling. Right.
So this is based on relatively recent research, only in the last couple of years, but some psychological researchers have developed this idea of victim signaling, meaning people who publicly broadcast mistreatment. And so they've developed and validated these scales, things like I often express my concern that people who look like me aren't represented in the media, or how frequently you're mistreated or overlooked or neglected or maltreated. And so that's victim signaling, how often you broadcast these things about yourself and how frequently, the intensity of it. And one of the interesting findings from this line of work is that the tendency to victim signal is highly correlated, about as high as correlations get in psychology with the dark triad personality traits.
Okay, so a lot of people are talking about that. Peterson's constantly talking about that. Explain that to us, please.
So the dark triad personality traits, this is a constellation of traits encompassing narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. So narcissism, a lot of people know about this term. It's an entitled self-importance. And psychopathy, this is a callousness, a cynicism, associated with cruelty and disregard for other people. And Machiavellianism is the willingness to be strategically duplicitous and the willingness to exploit other people for your own self-interest, your own gain. And so The dark triad isn't, these measure sort of subclinical psychopathy and narcissism. These aren't intended for sort of, these aren't like validated clinical instruments, meaning they fall on a normal distribution. All of us have to some degree varying levels of dark triad traits within us. But what the victim signaling research shows is that people who score very highly on the dark triad are also especially likely to broadcast their victimhood. They're signaling how actively maltreated they are. And what the researchers of this line of work suggest is that people who are high on the dark triad trait, they generally tend to be quite good at executing the strategies necessary for them to extract resources. So whether material resources, so this could just be money, it could be social and romantic and professional resources, friends, allies, romantic partners, internships, jobs, educational benefits, and so on, that if you can portray yourself in a certain way. And so people high in the dark triad traits, wherever you drop them, they will execute that strategy. And in the modern Western countries, generally we tend to be sympathetic to victims. People who've been maltreated through no fault of their own, victims of misfortune, we tend to believe that they should be treated especially well. And so people who are high in the dark triad sort of have picked up on this, like, oh, if I signal my victimhood, then this will increase my chances of achieving my goals. And so, just to be clear, the research isn't saying if you're a victim, then you're more likely to be a psychopath or high on dark triad. Right. What they're saying is if you're high on the dark triad traits, you're more likely to feign victimhood or mimic victimhood.
So, you know what, I've noticed this with so many things. I've noticed this with religion. I've just noticed with so many things. So this is fascinating. I want to drill down on this with you. But what's really interesting to me is, why does everybody else buy into that? That's the interesting thing to me. So somebody's screaming that they're a victim, they're advertising that they're a victim, they're saying they're a victim, they're saying they've been victimized, they're whatever they're doing, weaponizing offices of diversity, or they're going on social media, or why does everybody else seem to buy into that?
I think people generally like to be empathic and compassionate. They don't want to be seen as a bad person, especially when there's a crowd. If it's just you and another person and they're yelling the stuff at you, then maybe you'll question it or ask or ask them to explain themselves or elaborate. But often what you'll find is that very, very seldom do victim signalers do things in private that way, right? If it's just you and them alone in a room, no social media, no devices, no anything, they're not going to engage in this sort of display of victimhood. But if it's on camera, or if there are people around, or if they're in a crowd, or even if just one spectator who they're trying to impress, then often they'll engage in this sort of victimhood exhibition. And no one wants to look like they're heartless or cruel. And often what you'll see is, the people who are the most likely, like these situations in which people are the least willing to push back or challenge is when it's sort of a member of the majority group against historically, like a member of a historically oppressed group. Right?
Even when we read and I do the street epistemology exercise, we know that even people who self-identify on the right and are conservative completely fall into that. I mean, it's almost like there's just yet again another mass delusion operative in society. So I guess, do you think it's possible that social media has created more dark triad personalities than would occur in the wild?
So without social media, would dark triad traits be? Well, so there's some research on this question, and the answer is probably not, but it's still tentative. What seems to happen is social media is it's an environment in which people who are already high in the dark triad traits can flourish. Right, so it's not changing personalities; it's just attracting people who have dark triad traits, and they draw a disproportionate amount of attention online. So social media and the algorithms are usually optimized for clicks and attention and retweets, and negativity tends to sell, and it tends to attract a lot of attention. And so if you're high in the dark triad traits, you can troll or be mean or cruel or dunk on people, and that's a quick way to get some attention. And people high on the dark triad traits are more willing to engage in that. I'm not so sure if it's actually changing personality, though.
I mean, our institutions seem to feed into this, right? Specifically, I'm thinking in the context of which I'm most familiar, our academic institutions seem to feed into this, and then people being offended. And then another interesting phenomenon that I think feeds into this, you let me know, is that people can be offended on someone else's behalf. I call that offense by proxy. And so there's this whole kind of it's not even a cottage industry. There's this whole the zeitgeist now is just, we're taking, and I've argued for a long time, this is not only a mass delusion, but it's a mass delusion led by people who are underaccomplished. That's why they want to claim that the system is at fault. There's something intrinsic in the system. They have, I didn't call it dark triad, but they have certain psychological disorders that they then victim signal, to borrow a term from you, that's I first heard that from you, victim signaling. They victim signal so that they let everybody know that we live in a victim culture, as opposed, Jonathan Haidt talks about the dignity culture, a different kind of culture. They live in a victim culture. They virtue signal, especially on social media. I mean, so you really have a bunch of factors overlapping. But my question to you is, why does everybody else buy into that? Like, if somebody is screaming up and down the roof, they're a victim, and I noticed conservatives and Republicans doing this too. They want to get in the victim goodie bag.
Yeah. Well, it's so why do people respond to it? I think it really is about not wanting to be seen as a bad person. I think we tend to operate from a position of, like, if someone is really adamant that they've suffered, you look cruel, you look heartless to say, like, give me the evidence, or how do I know, or tell me more about that. If you
like, believe all women, would that be?
Believe all women, yeah, that would be an example of this. And I think slowly maybe things are starting to change where we're becoming a bit more skeptical of it. But in the moment, it's just people are overwhelmed by it. It's a very easy way to sort of get people to backpedal, to yield, is to yell at them about how victimized you are.
I agree completely. So let me run with this, if I may. So the whole believe all women thing, it's kind of like the defund the police. No, it really wasn't. It wasn't defunded the right way. So you would say believe all women, and then I would say, like, all of them, like, they never lie, all of them. And so instead of saying no, it's a slogan, or no, it's just that we need some accountability for men, or historical injustice, whatever. No, they say believe all women, believe all women. And then when it becomes morally unfashionable, they say, well, we didn't mean all women. So there really is a kind of, it's not a cognitive dissonance, but it's something I see over and over again, of the failure to acknowledge the truth of something. Like in religion, the conversations go from, my religion is true, and then you undermine that claim, and they immediately go to the benefits argument. It's beneficial. So they never said, well, okay, well, maybe it's not true, but it's beneficial. Or I did an event with Billboard Chris. I don't know if you know who he is. He just wears this. It's a literal sign that he wears, and it says, children cannot consent to puberty blockers. That's exactly what it says. Children cannot consent. And so here's the formula. Rob. Every time people come up and say, that's not happening, he'll give overwhelming evidence to show that's happening, and that's a good thing that it's happening, right? So there really is something, and I don't know if that's embedded in the ideology, but there really is something in a sense, or humanity, or the way we process ideas, and says, you know what, I believe this, I made a mistake, I was wrong about this, but even though that was incorrect, there's still a large incidence of women who we need to listen to, or trust but verify, or however you want to say it. And I'm wondering if I'm kind of thinking to myself about the relationship between dark triad groups that people go into, like virtue group, almost ideological tribes that they go into, that then signal boost on social media people's victimhood. And then there's, like, I think Gad, my buddy Gad Sad calls it victim jockeying. So I'm trying to bring those disparate elements.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting. So when people when the people do that move of it's not happening, and then it's good that it is, but then sometimes it's always been that way. So one of the things that people in the trans ideology, they'll say, like, trans has always existed, or it's always been with us, or it's not that there's been an increase in trans kids, it's that they've always been that way, and now we're allowing them to express who they really are. And so they do this sort of shell game, and I think there's a strategy underlying it, which is essentially, if I tell you it's not happening, then you're not going to be concerned. so if I have an agenda and I want to push it through and I don't want anyone to battle it, I want to sort of pull the wool over your eyes as I'm trying to do it. And then as soon as I'm close by and it's about to happen, then I can say it's happening and it's good that it is, right? It's sort of moving close, like the object is to sort of move closer to power while appearing not to move at all.
Can you pull up the video that I did with Billboard Chris in Eugene where the guy gets really mad? That young kid's like, "You're a fascist." Okay, so you talk a lot and you write a lot about something that I'm extremely interested in, and that is belief. Why people believe certain things, what causally is responsible for them to believe certain things. My thought about that, yes, I am interested in the mechanism of belief formation, but I'm super interested in why the moral mind overrides the rational mind. I'm super interested in how to develop both micro interventions and macro interventions, like one-on-one. That's what street epistemology is. It's a way to give someone doubt. And macro interventions. How do we intervene into the cognitions of people large scale to nudge them in a certain direction? There's a lot to that, but without going into that idea, I want to show you a clip and I want to get your feedback on it. And I'm going to ask you, how did this happen?
Die, you rednecks. Why don't you quit being such a waste of oxygen?
Oh, you were the same person that ran away.
Why don't you present
You
your
want to have a
argument? We'll
conversation and
listen to
present
what you have to
your
say.
information?
Because I'm not going to give a platform to you Nazis. Why don't you go home?
You can't explain
and
your
quit being
position?
such losers. My position is I care about human rights and I care about people living their lives and minding their own business and not being in my face with stupid cameras. So,
But you walked over here.
We
Get out of
can
here.
bring down the volume a little bit.
Yeah.
well, I don't care. I am
we're gonna be
trying to make a
respectful to you.
scene because you guys
Can I
care
ask
about
you a couple
genociding
questions?
trans people.
That's
No,
not it.
you're not gonna ask
Genociding?
me
What
Do you think it's okay to
constitutes
sterilize
genocide?
children?
What are you talking about?
None of this is actually happening. You guys are dumb.
You
You're
mean
cherry picking.
kids aren't getting puberty blockers? What is not happening that
I'm
he's
not putting
claiming?
myself on this platform. You guys are idiot losers.
Well, you
Goodbye.
just put yourself on.
You're the one inserting yourself into the platform.
Go home, you redneck loser.
Is that the best argument you can marshal?
Okay, so this is fascinating to me on multiple levels, and I wanted your opinion about this. How does that happen to somebody?
Well, so we've been talking a bit about the dark triad, and one of the interesting findings that has arisen out of that research is that there are sort of age-related correlates, and so people tend to peak in the dark triad personality traits in the late teens and the early 20s, in college age, military age as well. And one of the things about the dark triad, it's not necessarily these, although they call it the dark triad and it has these sort of dark associations, they can be sort of channeled to productive ends. But they can also be channeled toward sort of unproductive or detrimental ends as well. And I think like a lot of universities, a lot of young people, when they get together, when they share an ideology, when they're at the sort of the peak of the dark triad years in their lives, this can happen, right? So there's an idea in social psychology. It's an old idea called group polarization. Yeah. And what happens is when you bring people into a room who all tentatively share the same opinion, a simple example, we all kind of like this band, we kind of like it, and we're all talking with one another. Oh, you kind of like it, I kind of like it. If you give them maybe 20 minutes to talk about this band, by the end of that 20-minute conversation, everyone is going to like that band a lot more than when they started. Because part of it is a sort of a signaling thing of like ingratiating yourself with one another, like, oh, you kind of like it. And maybe I only a little bit like it, but I learn you like it. I'll pretend to like it much more. And then gradually they sort of converge on how amazing this band is. So I think a lot of these people, initially they start out maybe tentatively kind of questioning and support. Maybe they'd be in the neutral in that game, sort of center. They're not really sure. But when they're around a lot of other people who sort of tentatively hold this opinion as well.
Cass Sunstein writes about that as
sort
well.
of, Cass Sunstein wrote that great book, Conformity, and the sort of preference cascades, and then gradually they converge on the same thing to the point where even when they're not in that group anymore, that opinion has hardened, and they're willing to cling to that belief.
So that individual, they did not seem mentally well to me, which is the college in 2023 is the perfect place for people who are not mentally well. So they plug into this community.
the community where they don't have to make their arguments, where indignation is better than, not even better than argument, but indignation is a priori or de facto justification. One's feelings are a justification for one's position, but only if it's one's position on certain sides of the issue. So I've been thinking about like things. So do you think it's possible, and if this is too far afield, let me know, but do you think it's possible to create a system that intervenes in the cognitions of these people and nudges them towards more civil and rational methods of disagreement, so they understand not the epistemological reasons why they should present an argument, but I just had a podcast with Dawkins when I asked him this question, but the moral reasons, right?
I think there is. I mean, so there's like a sort of a cynical, pessimistic perspective of you can't reason someone out of an opinion they didn't reason themselves into.
I don't believe that.
I don't think so either. I think
Pascal Boyer makes that out. I think that's demonstrably false.
Yeah, I think so too. I think for some of these individuals who hold these kinds of opinions, it's possible. So first, they have to hear this. They have to hear the alternative opinion from someone they respect.
Correct.
They also have to hear it.
They have to hear it. Period.
Well, they have to hear it. Period. But if they hear it from someone who they consider to be a coalitional adversary, someone a redneck loser or something, if they say it, then they're immediately the guard's going to come up and say, "Oh, you're my adversary. I'm not going to listen to you."
Right.
But if it's from someone in their in group, someone who they consider to be in the same coalition, the same social group, the same community, and they voice an alternate opinion, someone who they respect and admire, someone who has status within that group, and they voice an alternate opinion, then they'll be willing to listen and to potentially change their mind.
Those opinions, though, can't get aired in college campuses. Like, you can't air this. So that person, he actually is an epistemic victim. He is literally an epistemic victim because he has no chance to hear the other side of the argument.
Yeah.
So, but going back to that clip, which I found genuinely interesting, like, there is something tragic for his intellectual life, his belief life, about not being even able to consider. I mean, he has it written on a billboard. He said, "You're genociding trans people." Like, what are you talking about? Like, but so the other thing that I was wondering is, okay, so we got a bunch of things going on here. I want to talk about. My feeling is that a lot of people, and by a lot I mean significant minority of people, hold those views. I think the majority of people about the whole transitioning kids are under 18. Of the people who've thought about it, I think that the majority of people would be against it, but they're afraid to speak out. So in those cases of people like that, it's almost like they're holding educators and people hostage to defer to their certainty. They're so certain that they're on the court. Has anybody ever told you you're on the wrong side of history?
I've heard that before. Yes.
Yeah.
As if history is its own entity that's sort of naturally unfolding. It's a sort of like this Hegelian idea of like, things will naturally progress towards a certain end.
Well, I'm extremely sympathetic to that. I do think the moral arc bends toward justice, but the thing about that is that they know what the right side of history is, and the kind of hubris and the arrogance involved in that. But back to these people who are in a system, an academic system, they're basically being brainwashed. There are no correctives to that person to say, hey, like, James said, hey, just like bring it down. Let's have a conversation about this. There's no social capital to be gained from having a rational conversation. It's only to be lost, because in those contexts, if we view belief revision in which it doesn't go to whatever the moral orthodoxy is, it's viewed as a bad thing. So we've really created these systems. And my question to you is, I was wondering if you could talk about the jumbled mess of concepts that I just gave you in terms of victim signaling. And how can we make rationality worth signaling?
Yeah, well, it's one of the points you brought up is that it's true. Speaker, like the cancellations, deplatforming, all of these things are up. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I decided not to pursue a traditional academic job. I saw what happened at Yale with the Nicholas and Erica Kostrakis, that famous sort of the Halloween costume controversy.
Yeah.
That was my first semester in college. And then at Cambridge, I saw Jordan Peterson get disinvited.
Right,
I've seen,
for sure.
and then behind the scenes, I've seen a lot of other ugly stuff, as I'm sure you have too.
Oh,
like
boy.
for every public cancellation at a university that you're aware of, there are at least 10 others behind the scenes that no one hears about. It's really alarming. But so it's true that on campus, it's difficult to get different kinds of speakers with different viewpoints. But what I'm seeing now is that a lot of people are receiving information and alternate points of view online, right? They still can't shut down YouTube and Twitter and all these other outlets, Substack, where you can get alternate points of view. One of the things I'm seeing among undergrads at different college campuses is that they're finding each other because they all watch the same stuff. Like, oh, you watch Peter Boghossian's channel, I do too, and like they can form little communities based on who they're listening to, the kind of podcasts they like, if they listen to Rogan or Peterson or whoever. And this is a way for them to sort of coalesce and find one another. And so even if they can't sort of see the speaker on campus, maybe they get together in their groups and watch the videos, or go to one of the shows, or travel and try to see these people. And so there is the campuses themselves, the universities themselves, it's madness, but there is sort of hope outside of it, and the students are finding it.
So how do we make rationality worse signaling? How do we change?
Yeah,
How do we change that?
Confer status to rationality.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, probably by what we're doing now, right? Like having these kinds of conversations, reminding people of the importance of truth. And also, I think, like, sort of reminding people of, what is the purpose of communication, and what are our goals.
So let's go back to that. You know who Faisal Al-Mutar is? He's a very, very close friend of mine. He runs Ideas Beyond Borders. They translate English Enlightenment texts into Arabic. He's a hero. But he told me something. I asked him, excuse me, if you ever have a chance, you should meet. It's like dog years, 7-1. It really is. Like every minute with Faisal is like 7 minutes with just about anybody. But I asked him about secularism once, and I asked him why Islamic radicals were opposed to secularism, because it lets them practice their religion the way they want. And he said they don't care about practicing their religion the way they want. They hate secularism. They want everybody else to practice their religion. And I'm wondering, when you talked about, you said the importance of truth, the importance of civil conversations, but it's a kind of the same thing with secularism. They don't buy into that system. So they already don't buy into the system of truth. They've shifted to standpoint epistemology, my truth. They don't buy into the idea of civil conversations. That's platforming. That's privilege preserving epistemic pushback, or privilege seeking to preserve itself. They don't buy into any of the norms that we've established. I don't even know how long. They don't buy into basic norms. They don't buy into basic ways to adjudicate claims. They don't buy into any of it. So how do we make? I want to go back to that question. How do we make rationality worse signaling? Like, how do we make that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think a lot of it has to do with, if, like, one thing that would be worth doing is people who used to operate from a position of standpoint epistemology, and then they've changed their minds, right? Like, how did they get from sort of my truth, or truth is subjective or relativistic, or there's no such thing as truth, there's only power. How do they go from that to believing in objective, impartial truths, and studying how they made that transition? And then if they are, good at speaking and public appearances and so on, to interview those people and to give their perspective on how this happened.
Agreed. Two things. I completely agree. When you look at people, apostasy, people who have gone from one religion and abandoned their religion, or abandoned their faith, and they've gone to another one, we look and we ask them what they believed. I just did an interview, I can't remember where I was, in Austin with Carrie Smith, who used to belong to the woke religion, and she left. So what do you think about this? It's not like she's a lovely person, she's a fantastic person. And it's not like she was woke and then suddenly embraced the tenets of rationality. She became a Christian. So my first question is, how do we nudge people not to go to a particular faith, but to just embrace basic tenets of civility, reason, rationality? And my second question is, back to something I've been thinking about a lot and talking about a lot, the substitution hypothesis. Is it the case that belief is the default? The brain's the hardware, the software is, what the brain runs on culturally, mimetically, what comes in. And I've been wondering if somebody is kicked out or somebody decides, oh, wow, I believe some deranged beliefs, defund the police, believe all, whatever it was in the basket of propositions. I believe, racism is everyday, ordinary, whatever, every disparity of outcome must be explained by the system. There's literally no other possible explanation that I could even entertain. How do you, once they realize there's a problem with that, is it a good thing that they then go to a more benevolent delusion?
Well, it depends on like what your goals are, right? Like if you want to just sort of reduce the overall amount of like societal disruption and policies that increase violence and crime and so on, then maybe it is better to move towards something else that's empirically false.
Or benign.
Or benign, right? Yeah, I think sort of benign delusions are probably better than malicious ones. Yeah, I mean, I think that, there's a lot of interesting research on sort of the benefits of, say, religious belief. If you take sort of the metaphysical, truth claims aside, and just socially, what are the benefits? Community, friends, ritual, all of those things that are sort of edifying and uplifting, and then you strip that from people. They're going to find it elsewhere, and they're going to find other ideologies and dogmas, perhaps, that allow them to find their friends and find community, find rituals and belonging, and publicly demonstrating their commitment and belief to something, and maybe even engage in sort of small, acts of costly signaling, incurring a bit of cost to themselves to serve some kind of higher purpose. Yeah, could be.
Okay, so you wrote something. You wrote, another luxury belief is that religion is irrational or harmful. Members of the upper class are most likely to be atheists or non-religious, but they have the resources and access to thrive without the unifying social edifice of religion. And I wanted you to unpack that.
Right. Well, I think that this is a luxury belief, because if you're an affluent and so there are only so many sources of meaning in life, right? There's only so many things you can do. And if you're highly educated, if you're affluent, if you have economic, social, and cultural capital, you can find satisfaction in life through having an interesting job, or traveling, or having intricate and expensive hobbies. There are things you can do to take up your time that feel meaningful and significant to you. But if you are lower middle class, working class, poor person, and your job prospects are poor, and you're sort of going to a job, you clock in, you clock out, the job isn't the most intellectually stimulating or satisfying. Where can you derive your sources of meaning from, if not your job, if not from traveling, going to interesting places, or from partaking in fun hobbies that cost money? Well, one would be family, and one would be religion, serving others. And religion often helps to sort of create that structure that brings people together, that gives people a sense of meaning, a sense of yearning. So within countries, you find that there's an inverse correlation between wealth and religion, such that within countries, poor people tend to be more religious, and then across countries, poor countries, less developed countries, tend to be more religious than more developed countries, which tend to be less religious.
So the idea that a luxury belief is that religion is irrational or harmful, that must be at root that religion is not, I suppose, what religion and how fervent the believers are. But so I guess my question is, so is the idea, was I just guilty of committing a luxury belief in my statement that it may be better to nudge people toward more benevolent delusions? Is that a luxury belief?
I guess it depends what that, does that mean sort of nudge people towards religion, or?
Pretty much.
Yeah, I guess, so one, I think it could be a luxury belief, sort of, denigrating or disparaging religion, especially if I think we're slowly starting to see this right now, actually, that even among poorer communities in the U.S., religious belief is slowly dwindling as well. Where are they going to derive sources of meaning from, and if not from religion?
That. Like I've never understood that.
Yeah. So people who tend to get advanced degrees and people who are sort of highly intelligent and have, when you're an outlier on sort of multiple psychological variables, it's difficult to understand sort of the mindset of, what is it, 85 or 90% of humans on Earth today have some form of belief in a higher spiritual being. Let's you and I are the weird ones. I'm not a religious person either.
No, so let's go back to that meaning thing. Reed and I were just at a Alliance Jiu-Jitsu here in Dallas, and there was a guy who is the 22-year-old guy. This guy, I'm telling you, you do not want to make this man mad. I mean, he was a multiple gold-winning gi and no gi. I mean, this is an extraordinarily dangerous human being. I would bet anything if you asked this guy, he would say he derives. To achieve that level of proficiency, I would bet you that he would say that he derives an extraordinary amount of meaning from his activity. But the meaning that he derives is not illusory. It's come, as like Aristotle talks about this, it's come as a byproduct of genuine physical achievement. So it would seem that, or maybe that those kinds of strivings and accomplishments, it's just too much work for the vast majority of people.
Well, so, I mean, most people aren't particularly athletic or musically gifted or talented or intelligent or creative. Most people are, sort of average or below average on a variety of metrics. And so how do you live a satisfying life if, whatever, you have a 90 IQ and you're not going to be super smart, super talented, super creative? You're just a regular person making ends meet at your job. Where are you going to find sources of meaning from? And I think it doesn't have to be religion, but I think having religion available and sort of promoted and supported and cultivated and nourished, or at the very least not sort of actively undermined, I think that could be a source of meaning for a lot of people.
So you just said something that I've been thinking about and that you wrote about. So you've written about the idea of being in the military, and you wrote about it in terms of 80 and 85 IQ. But Peterson has talked about, he had a great discussion with Glenn Lowry, and subsequently I looked this up because I wanted to know, I respect Peterson, I like his stuff, and he has an incredible H-index, but I want to look the data up for myself. And it turned out that it was substantiated, corroborated from multiple sources. The U.S. military currently does not take, and you wrote about when they did take, and the number of reprimands, et cetera, and the training costs of people with IQs. They don't take people with IQs below 81. 10% of the population in the world, but I'm just talking about the United States, have IQs below 81. And I've been thinking about, this is a tad far afield from victim signaling or luxury beliefs, but this is your broad domain of expertise, so I'll just throw this out to you. So Peterson said, if you have an IQ below 81, you cannot fold a letter in thirds and put it in an envelope. If you have an IQ below 81, and all of these things follow, and 10%, 10% of people cannot fold a letter into thirds and put it into an envelope. 10% of people, the military will not have them. I'm trying to think of a politic way to avoid the word stupid, but I can't seem to think of one. They're not capable of even holding a gun and running into a field with an enemy. How does society help these people? What can we do to help them? I mean, when we talk about making them productive members of society, what does that even mean? If you can't fold an envelope into thirds, how are you going to pump gas?
Yeah. Well, I think it would, so those people exist among us, right? And I think a lot of them live on the margins of society. A lot of them are probably, homeless or addicted or in prisons or just sort of living at home with their parents or with, family members. trying to, survive and live day to day. And so for those people, where are they going to derive sources of meaning from? And I think it comes from relationships, right? Like attempting to serve other people in whatever way they can. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to mean, going to college or doing something especially impressive.
Well, he couldn't do any. They couldn't do vocational activities. They couldn't be carpenter, plumber. They couldn't have a skill.
Yeah.
But so I was thinking about that in terms of the genetic. Rawls calls it the genetic lottery. Some people just get lucky. Some people get unlucky. And if you don't know if you're going to be lucky or unlucky, I'll just perhaps give away too much of my own politics. I think that it's incumbent upon society to help people who cannot help themselves. Like we need to provide, we can't, the situation as is completely unsustainable and it's untenable. Like to have vast swaths of people tent camping, addicted to drugs, don't have adequate services. But that's another question. I'm talking about an immutable characteristic of people, IQs below 81. For the life of me, I cannot think of how to solve that problem. Yeah. It's not as if you can just spend $1 trillion and give them a job. I mean, what would the job even be?
I would be curious to know, like, if you looked at the most sort of menial jobs, is it really true that someone with an IQ of 81 can't, push a broom or wash dishes or something along those lines? I mean, it's possible, but if they can't do those things, then I think we would have to just go back to what you were saying before of just making sure that they're cared for in whatever way that we can, and to acknowledge that, we don't have to expend, trillions of dollars trying to get them through some kind of education program or trying to get them into some kind of a lucrative, high-paying job, just accepting them as they are and not trying to push them into things that maybe they would be uncomfortable with or incapable of.
Okay, let me throw something out. Again, I'm going to bounce to another topic if that's okay. Let me just throw something else I've been thinking about. So I'm increasingly using these interviews to ask people to help me clean up my own thinking, which has been good. So I've been thinking about the failures of the right and the failures of the left. One of the failures of the right, and I think it's pretty big and pretty conspicuous, one of the failures of the right is that the right just thinks that everybody can pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. That's clearly false. That's just demonstrably false. Like to go back to the statistic you gave, 3% of kids who graduate from foster homes get degrees. And so I think that the right has failed there. I think that the left has failed. The left seems to believe that if you can just change the system, you can achieve equity of outcomes.
Yeah.
That's demonstrably false. You cannot take a man who's 3 feet and change the system and he's going to be an NBA player. There were just intrinsic differences. They're all, blank slatists too. Not all, but many people on the left, not Pinker, but they're just blank slatists. And the right just seems to think that people can just pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. And so it seems to be that very few people are really thinking clearly about this problem.
Yeah. Well, the belief that, if we could just, twist the dials correctly, we'll get equal outcomes. I mean, if you look at siblings from the same family, right, raised in the same home by the same parents, attending the same schools, they don't have the same outcomes.
Right.
Like they don't have the same outcomes in terms of income and in terms of what they major in terms of all, a variety of metrics of interest, where they live, the prestige of their jobs. There's some correlation, but two siblings do not come out exactly the same. You're going to get disparities even within the same family. So it seems delusional to expect that you're going to expect equal outcomes from people in vastly different home lives, home structures, different schools, different neighborhoods, all these different things.
And that's the other thing. It's unclear why that would even be desirable. My mentor used to say, there are many ways to fail and few to succeed. That idea has been in intellectual history for a long time. I guess it's a kind of an issue of individual personal responsibility versus collective institutional support. And so I've been thinking about that. Okay, so Rob, where can people find you?
Yeah, they can follow me at Twitter at Rob K. Henderson and my Substack, robkhenderson.com.
Cool. And my Substack recommends your Substack, and I'm
going to recommend yours.
Oh, thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed reading your stuff. I think it's very fresh, it's very interesting, and I think it's a sober analysis of ways that we can think about problems that we face. And I think it's a necessary first step to eventually fixing those problems. So thank you for your work.
Thanks, Peter.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Everything we do is under the umbrella of the National Progress Alliance, nationalprogressalliance.org. It's a nonprofit, independent 501c3. Your generous donations keep us going and keep fueling content like this. So please help us out. Make a donation. We very much appreciate it. Thank you.